You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Live tropical weather bulletin. You can see here, well, somewhat. Omar, which weakened to a tropical depression earlier today, and tropical storm Nana, which is continuing towards the coast of Belize. I'm trying to get a better shot of it, actually. Okay, well, it's over there somewhere, and it's going to make landfall pretty soon. Hurricane warnings are out in place on that one. So that's one to watch very closely, and you can see emerging off the coast of Africa and over the eastern Atlantic a few more systems that could develop into tropical cyclones in the early part of this month. Also, looking at the eastern Pacific, actually, very little going on, as you can see there. The western Pacific does have two big systems. Maysak has just pushed through South Korea as a Category 2 in the end. And Typhoon Haishen is right behind it, and as you can see, it's building up momentum quite rapidly as well. So another storm that could pose some big threat to the western part of Japan and South Korea. My name is Nathan Foy. I'm joined by Amy, Ethan, and Lucas. Good evening to you all. And I need to fade you up first of all so we can actually hear you. And there you are. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So we've got several systems on the go once again this evening. Shall we begin with Maysak, which made landfall earlier on today? Where exactly did it make landfall in the end? Because I wasn't watching it that closely, but it was somewhere around the southeastern part of South Korea.
I believe so, and I think it made landfall there with a intensity around 80 knots, 90 miles per hour, which was a lot lower than what the JTWC were originally forecasting, up near 110, 115 miles per hour. So that's good that it weakened substantially before Maysak hit land. But I don't think that they're going to get lucky with this time with Haishen. Looks like that it's going to be quite a major typhoon over there.
Really, but this is the third time now that there's been a typhoon threatening the peninsula. But Maysak, first of all, it's moving offshore again, just off North Korea now. And I would say it's probably still a Cat 1 there.
Probably.
So looking decent, on its way to becoming post-tropical. It should make landfall in North Korea and move inland again over northern China. And looking
according to the JTWC, actually, it already is post-tropical.
It is? Really?
Mm-hmm. Well, they stated in their last warning at 21Z that it's becoming ex-tropical.
I don't think it's there yet.
It's close, though.
And they issue their final warning pretty much as soon as the storm did make landfall. Very close to Busan, actually. So northeast, just east of north in terms of movement, turning north and then turning northwest as it moves inland. So, but they issue final warnings very early, the JTWC, when that happens. So it's not necessarily the end of the storm. Some people might get into a false sense of security there. But the storm is still well and truly alive, and I'd still rate it at a Category 1 personally.
Absolutely.
Elsewhere, we've got another look at Hyshen. There it is. And what do we reckon about that one?
That one would not surprise me if it becomes a super typhoon. JTWC, in their latest warning, said, let me pull it up here, in their prognostic reasoning, Typhoon 11W Haishen is forecast to rapidly intensify over the next 24 to 36 hours with a peak intensity of 125 knots, that's 145 miles per hour, expected around 48 hours from now. However, this is the most important thing to note. The peak will likely rise and may occur earlier in the forecast period. That is evident in both forecasts, as the JMA, believe it or not, is forecasting a Category 5 out of Haishen.
Really?
Yes, they do forecast 10-minute sustained winds of 125 miles
Oh
per
my
hour, pressure 915
goodness.
millibars.
Oh my goodness. So, at any rate, stronger than Maysak, certainly. So that's probably super typhoon status, and it's certainly on its way right now. The ice starting to clear out. Northern side still looking a little bit like there's a gap there, but the convective cloud tops are very good on this, and its structure looks decent.
Absolutely, it looks well on its way to becoming a super typhoon. If I were to make a forecast right now, I wouldn't quite make the call in Category 5 like the JMA is doing. I probably went with the peak of 155 miles per hour. But it's a matter of time until this storm rapidly intensifies, and once that's done, only an hour replacement cycle will stop it, and those are very hard to predict.
Blimey. So those are the two main features in the the Western Pacific. I'm trying to get one. Well, there's a little look at Nana right now. You can just about see the coast of Honduras at the very bottom of the image. Obviously, there's the center of the storm, the bit that's blowing up convective cloud tops, and on the northern side, maybe some shear affecting it.
Absolutely. There's just a few things that I'd like to point out about Nana. There is a hurricane warning in effect, believe it or not, for Hannah. This
Nana.
hurricane warning is from the coast of Belize, thank you, from Belize City southward to the Belize-Guatemala border. I don't think Nana will become a hurricane, though. It's quite close to land, and shear is affecting it. So at this time, I'd probably forecast a peak of only 60 miles per hour. In fact, isn't it at right now, I believe?
Yeah, that's what it's at right now. So,
And something else notable about Nana is the National Hurricane Center is giving it a 10% chance, a 20% chance in 5 days of reforming in the Eastern Pacific.
wow. And that is certainly a valid percentage, because some models have been suggesting that.
Yeah, HWRF, I saw earlier, was taking its circulation into the Eastern Pacific, well into the Eastern Pacific, actually.
Oh no, let's
Taking
get
it well
that
to the,
headline away. That headline is not correct anymore. We're not doing Laura anymore, so we'll just take that off. That shouldn't have been there in the first place. So there's the track forecast again, and in the intermediate advisory there from 7 p.m. Central, which is now, looks like it's gone slightly north of forecast.
So the further north that this storm goes doesn't really mean any implications, just means a tiny little shift in where it'll make landfall, I'd say.
Could make a significant difference, though, especially for the coast of Belize. As it stands right now, it looks like the landfall area would be somewhere around, I'm just trying to equate myself with the geography here, Dangriga town would appear to be the area very close to the landfall point.
Yeah, and this storm probably will make landfall probably just over 10 hours from now. So it's moving toward the west at, what, 15 miles per hour or so?
There's the view I was looking for. So this is the best shot of Nana right now, and you can see it in context with the Eastern Pacific basin. So the storm there blowing up some decent convection, and also models were rumbling on about some of that convection on the northern side of the storm over Cuba right now. Maybe that would form into its own thing as well. I don't know.
Perhaps.
I think the models are trending off that most recently, but something curious to know. It'd be just the kind of thing to happen in a year like this. Something else that will get another name makes us one closer to the Greek alphabet in record time, but there we have it. So, Nana, not a particularly large storm, but 60-mile-an-hour winds, certainly potentially destructive, and a landfall expected in Belize very shortly. So we also have, of course, our 24/7 stream, which is running alongside this live right now. So That's always running. Well, at least when we put it on. It is on at the moment. Will be for some time yet. But we do have 2 code red situations potentially. Maysak, of course, which is going off the boil now. And the new one that's arriving, Haishen, Western Pacific, is probably taking the headlines again here. Even though the Atlantic's been so active. Headlines so far right now, Maysak moving off South Korea now towards the north. The good thing about this storm is that it moved through very quickly, so I should imagine that rainfall and flooding and surge impacts might not have been quite as high as they could have been.
Yeah, that's certainly some good news, and this will continue to push north into North Korea, and eventually probably ending up in parts of Russia as a post-tropical cyclone. So, Maysak's tail as a tropical cyclone is likely coming to an end.
Even in Russia, it might be seen, yeah. Let's see if we can take some comments and questions then as we take a look now at... What are we looking at here? No, we don't want that anymore. This is Hyshen. Look at that once again. It's probably the strongest storm out there right now. Will be very soon. Some questions. Will Nana cross into the East Pacific? Well, we sort of touched on that just a moment ago. It seems somewhat feasible. I wouldn't bet on it just yet, but certainly a possibility. There will be a low-pressure system in the Gulf of Mexico on September the 10th. Can it have some odds of development? Well, we're only just entering the 3rd universal time, so that's still a ways off yet, 7 days plus. So I wouldn't go for that at all just yet. What's our opinions on the African waves and areas of interest?
I was just about to say something about that.
Yeah?
So, there's 2 areas of interest right now. There's one with a 20% chance of development in 48 hours, 30% in 5 days. That one, I know that the icon has been keen on that system developing, and then stalling around there and meandering, and then absorbing the system to the east that has a 60% chance of development, and then becoming a hurricane as it pushes toward the Windward Islands.
It's doing all kinds of things.
That's a scenario, but one thing that I was also noticing was the icon model was also picking up on a wave behind the 60% area of interest, and that one could become quite a significant tropical cyclone. I don't know if any other models are on board with that. I'm waiting to pull up the models right now just to check on that.
Do we still think that the models are underdoing some of these as well?
Absolutely, I think they are. I'm just having a look at the models now, and I'll turn on my screen here so you can see what I'm talking about here. But you can see blatantly right here, down here, this is dubbed, the 2030 area of interest is dubbed Invest 91L. This is quite clearly it. Quite clearly has a tropical cyclone in around 48 hours from now. And there you can see the 60% area of interest, and the Euro model doesn't have that many frames in it, unfortunately, but you can see it somewhat absorbs that 60% area of interest.
Yep.
Then it becomes a tropical cyclone as it moves off towards the west.
24-hour intervals there. And what's the pressure at the end on that storm? The dominant one?
980 millibars.
980.
81 looks like. Another one developing behind that, too.
Yep, it's that time of the year. This really is the point where the African wave season reaches its height, isn't it?
Absolutely, and with September being in full force now, really just a matter of time before we get a significant hurricane in the Atlantic, probably a major hurricane, wouldn't surprise me, as conditions are to be extraordinarily favorable this month.
That's the worrying part. Already 2 storms in September so far, and we're only 3 days in. They were both named on day 1 of the month. Do we think that we're going to get 6 or more this month, as some people have been suggesting?
It's really only a matter of time to see how many named storms we get this month. But if I had to guess, we'll probably get to at least the S name this month, at least.
Wow. Lucas, what do you think?
I'm sorry. I'm I'm tired right now.
Oh.
I'm hard time.
It is very tiring tracking these storms. You're completely
Yeah,
right.
indeed.
Amy, how about you? Oh no, we've got 2 drop lines. This is going well.
I've also been keeping track of the questions in the chat. I have lots.
Yes.
Do you think we will hit the Greek names this month? Christian Magul Diaz says.
I don't think so, but you really never know, do you?
But it
My guess
depends.
would be no. I think we'll get close.
We got another one from Noisy Endo1. Could there be a major hurricane next week in the Atlantic? Some models are pointing that.
Yep, there could be. We're not forecasting one yet, but keep watching. This is the Atlantic in September, peak season. Anything can happen. When you think that Laura wasn't fully in the peak of the season, it was nearly there, but not quite. Goes to show what this basin is capable of in years like this. You just read that one out. Do we think that Laura could be retired? Bit premature on that, but I think you could probably work that one out for yourself. Apparently, there's a 100% chance of TC development 1 to 120 hours a little north of Colombia. I don't think that's true, honestly, and I'm not seeing anything anywhere near Colombia right now, but we'll see how that one goes.
So, currently on my screen, Nathan, I just want to hop over to Hyshen real quick and
Oh, sure.
pull some models of that. So, I've got the Euro model here, hour by hour. This is a little better, but the pressure is actually probably going to be lower than what's going to be shown here. So, as you can see, there's Haishen, you can see Maysak on the upper end there. Quickly intensifying to a typhoon there, down to the 950s.
950, 940, 930s. Yep, I know it's going to be a Category 5.
923 I saw there for a frame.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely a super typhoon.
And then deepening as it passes by Japan. And then weakens a little bit, and then...
And if it makes landfall in South Korea, it might be the strongest South Korea typhoon on record, possibly.
We've been saying that for the last 2 storms, though. It
Yeah.
could possibly be the strongest typhoon in South. We certainly don't want it, that's for sure. But Bavi, first of all, which ended up missing in the end. Not completely missing, but didn't make a landfall in South Korea. Hit North Korea instead. Followed by Maysak, which has just made landfall, we think at 100 miles an hour or so. Maybe a little bit higher?
I think it was around 90.
You think it was only 90?
Yeah, because the JTWC's 21Z forecast had the point just barely inland. I'll pull it up right now, actually.
Okay.
And it looks like that they went with a 90-mile-per-hour landfall. There's their forecast count.
At least in regards to Haishen, what's going to matter a lot if it makes landfall in South Korea is how quickly it's moving at that point. Because unlike really Bavi or Maysak, it's going to accelerate pretty sharply between now days 3.5 to 4.5 and 5. So if it's still really strong at the day 3 point, it could hold that intensity a lot better up towards landfall, especially if it doesn't have full land interaction with Kyushu in Japan, which was forecast yesterday but isn't forecast anymore.
But for the time being, at least, none of them made landfall as a Category 3, so it remains only one storm in history has made a Category 3 landfall on the peninsula of South Korea. And that, I think, I always get these names confused. It's either Sarah or Sally. Then the year was 1959, that's for sure. A crazy year in many aspects. Crazy
Sarah.
decade. Sarah. Category 3 landfall, that one.
Could be close with this one, though. Day 4 forecast point, and I'm not sure about the JMA, but the JTWC has it at 120 miles an hour just offshore of Jeju and moving north-northwest at that point very quickly. So it could hold its intensity just long enough for it to be 100 knots at landfall.
But that's what JTWC forecasted for Maysak.
That's
No,
true.
It does make you wonder.
I will say, though, it probably won't be 100 knots or so at landfall. It'll probably be around maybe 90, 100, 105 at most, probably, I'd say. Because one thing that I've been noting on some of the models is the storm once it nears Japan is absolutely massive.
And that was in miles per hour, right?
Holy cow!
Yes.
It does get
I mean,
enormous. That is going to be a
That
big
thing
threat when
is
the wind
that
field
thing is
increases.
huge.
Yeah, the
Jesus
Euro model
Christ.
doesn't shows the wind field being fairly large
What is
on
the
the
lowest pressure for that
models.
storm?
Quite
Possibly,
low.
possibly in the mid 920s, I
But-
think.
Models a
GFS
day or
model.
two ago were going down to 910s. They've backed off that a little bit.
Oh yeah, I
A
think
little
that
bit.
might happen.
I mean, the pressure might reach its zenith a bit after the actual wind speed, though. As it gets latitude and starts to weaken slightly per the forecast. Especially if it really rapidly intensifies and reaches its peak a bit sooner than the current forecast called for, which the JTWC did say is a possibility. Then you could see the storm move northward without its full peak wind speeds, which JMA is saying super typhoon level, and then have the pressure kind of deepen as the storm pretty significantly expands in size as it passes near Kyushu and up towards South Korea.
You can
Again, what
see
you're seeing on the
here-
screen is a projection. How far in advance?
This is about, just having a look here. This is about it's about 3.5 days in advance. And you can see tropical storm force winds are almost reaching the coast of China, which is absolutely massive. This is the GFS model, so it might overdo it a bit because the Euro has it significantly smaller.
This is definitely kind of the same size as Tip in 1979, or
I will
I
say,
feel like,
I don't
though,
I
think
feel
it's
like it
that
is the same
size.
size. I feel like it is.
What?
I will say though,
No, it definitely isn't. It really isn't. Yeah, even on the GFS, it gets pretty close to China, but uh, and that's the largest model run I'm seeing in terms of wind speed. But the extended tropical storm force winds on this one would maybe be about 600 to 700 miles or so, which is still granted very large, but not really where Tip was at.
I will say though, the Euro and the GFS are both relatively agreed on where its position will be early Sunday morning here in the US.
Are they
So
still
that's
trending
definitely good
west?
news. Yes, they are still trending west a little bit.
That's not good.
More time the storm has over water means the stronger it will be. I know 2 days to 3 days ago, some models were forecasting this to be a Category 4 at landfall in Japan. So luckily that's backed off, but another hit for South Korea, unfortunately.
And as you've been hearing, out of the wilderness came Strat's voice. Good evening to you as well.
Evening. We are enjoying the college life and here for coverage.
Honestly, I wasn't completely expecting Strat to appear in the chat.
Well, he's here now, so there you have
Yep.
it.
Thank God.
Some fan favourites out there going for Strat, but there we have it. So, what are your thoughts on Nana, Strat?
I mean, there's still hurricane warnings in place right now ahead of it, and hurricane force gusts are definitely possible. It's just probably becoming less and less likely by the hour that it actually reaches hurricane force sustained winds by the time it comes ashore. Still a very dangerous storm nonetheless for Central America, though. So, if you're under a warning zone there, please make sure you're taking the proper precautions ahead of it. At least in regards to that. It is going to be interesting to see it potentially try to come out into the Eastern Pacific with the circulation as a remnant low. Although I'm pretty sure even the models that try to have it survive all the way there actually dissipate it shortly after entrance anyways. But I think Ethan said it earlier, it's about a 20% chance of development of the remnants in the next 5 days or something like
That's
that.
about
So
right.
10%
maybe
in
something to
5
keep an eye on.
days.
That's about right. And it looks a little bit sheared on the northern side.
Absolutely. Even though the atmosphere around it is pretty moist, other than actual landed traction trying to bring in some dry air contusions, the wind shear to the north, even though it's only really been 10 to 15 knots aloft most of its lifespan so far, has really been enough to try to, at least in the past day, push more convective activity to the south of the center of the storm, preventing it from really becoming a hurricane.
Strat, just a question for you. Would you agree with me in saying that Nana will probably not become a hurricane before landfall, just simply because it's running out of time?
I would be inclined to agree with that, other than the chance
Absolutely,
that
it's
there
only
is, of
what?
course,
You're
10
looking...
hours about?
No, it's going to be much less than that.
Oh, it's even less now. It's moving a bit quicker than
The way it's
expected. Then
going, it's got to
definitely.
be less than 10 hours.
Yeah. I mean, my thoughts on it really is that, it can of course try to really rapidly organize at the last second. Smaller storms can get, a nice burst of convection and really spin up right before landfall.
Hmm.
But the time is just really running out for it right now. And it isn't as symmetrical as it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Um, Flight level winds, of course, so far at least aren't as high as they were yesterday either. So
It might
it
get
is possible.
75 miles an hour, but
I mean,
have to push for it
hurricane
right now.
Yeah, hurricane gusts are expected nonetheless, though. So if you are there, that's still a serious threat on its own. Those elevated gusts, even if they're only for a few seconds, can be quite damaging, especially once they start to reach hurricane force. So I wouldn't say that having hurricane warnings is a mistake at all, just in case it does reach that sustained wind speed. And of course, those gusts can kind of bring hurricane conditions, even if the storm is a bit off from there.
Just going to do a little bit of extrapolation here and see how far the storm has actually travelled recently. Not going to be incredibly precise, but we'll get a general number on how far it's travelled in the last 4 hours. And that's a
Haishen's eye is already appearing right now. I can actually see it on the satellite.
It certainly is. Approximately 52 miles in the last 4 hours. That's about 13 miles per hour, just short of. So at this rate, it would be making landfall 81 miles away from land. So you do the math.
It's about 6 or 7.
Hours? Yeah. 6 or 7 hours by the looks of it.
Yeah. I will say it is kind of interesting to see the tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center, and you go to the Eastern Pacific view, and it has a little mark over Nana Center right now, rather than where it's going to emerge in the future. That is an interesting feature that you don't see too often.
Unfortunately, I can't show it on here, but I'm sure it does look at the National Hurricane Center's website for that. Let's take some more questions. How deep into the Greek alphabet will we get in 2020? It's no longer a question of if it's going to happen, it's how deep into the alphabet is the question now on people's lips.
There's a lot of letters in the Greek alphabet, so, I mean, if we get there, I think what is the mean forecast so far, between 22 to 24 named storms, depending on the source. The National Hurricane Center's middle point is 22. I know Colorado State is saying 24, and we have 23. So that would get you one or two letters in, maybe up to three. But, if there's a burst of unexpected activity even beyond current expectations, which the season certainly hasn't let down in so far, you could try to push a little bit further than that, but we probably wouldn't be reaching, halfway into the Greek alphabet or something like that.
Why didn't Nana intensify more when it had a pinhole eye?
I think other people here can concur with this, really, but when you have a small storm, especially when it's in its formative stage, it didn't have, a full eye wall. It had, a formative one. It was trying to get one ready to go to try to intensify, and it was concerned that it could do so. But when you have much storms like that, they're much more prone to breaking down and not finishing that setup that they really need to start legging up, for example,
True,
and get
it
to
was
be a
tiny.
stronger storm. Yeah, so, if Nana was, further out in the eastern tropical Atlantic and it was looking like this right now and it just failed what it was trying to do yesterday, it could still have plenty of time to get its act together again and become a more significant threat potentially down the line. But of course, it's less than 10 hours from landfall now, probably closer to 6 or 7, and it just doesn't really have the time anymore to really start to ramp up again.
Do you think that Texas could get a major hurricane? It almost did.
Yeah, we almost got Laura. I mean, when it made landfall, we got absolutely nothing from it. Nothing.
And you're in Houston, yeah?
Yep.
Hardly anything over there. Interesting.
I mean, fortunately, at least for very large portions of Texas, a bit of that shear that tried to impart itself on Laura the last couple hours of landfall kind of restricted its outflow a bit from really reaching further into Texas, even though the core of the storm remained very well defined throughout. I mean, can Texas get a major hurricane later this year? It's possible. It always is every year. But there isn't anything, at least near term, to say whether or not that will happen, with any specific active disturbance.
Questions about whether there'll be a Category 5 in the Atlantic. Definitely can't be ruled out. I'd be really surprised if there isn't one somewhere, and that's just being honest. I think the conditions are extremely favourable Maybe in a different scenario, Laura might have reached Category 5 status. I don't think there's any argument that it could have done. I think 155 would be the absolute maximum you could give it.
I mean, in regards to lore, at least, if it was moving a bit slower, so instead of moving just a lot of its lifespan up towards landfall, that last day it was moving, closer to 15 miles an hour. If it was going 10, it could have had some more time before reaching, some land interaction, a bit higher wind shear. Could have tried to do that. Fortunately, we didn't see that happen, at least.
What will we do if we use all the Greek names? Well, don't worry, we'd need about 50 storms for that to happen. Or somewhere near there.
Was it because there's 21 letters from the Atlantic alphabet? I know the Greek is 24, so you need 46 name storms to go past that.
45.
Oh, God.
That's quite a lot of name storms. We haven't had anywhere near that. The record is 2005, of course. How many nameable storms were there, though? Was it 29?
I forget it. It was 28 or 29, but then there was also, an unnamed one. So if you count that, then you get to, I think, 30.
I don't know. I think
if you
it's
count,
29.
I think it was Gamma 2.
Oh, if we're counting Gamma 2, then yeah, it'll be 30 then.
Yeah. So,
Eee.
I mean, you'd still have to have 50% more activity than 2005's full year to exhaust the Greek alphabet on
Ain't
top of
gonna
that.
happen. Is there wind shear that could weaken Typhoon Haishen?
Not really in the immediate term, and I'm not sure if anyone has any wind shear graphics up, but it's in very favorable conditions for the next 48 to 60 hours or so. As it moves further north, though, and begins to get closer to Japan, wind shear should pick up as, it moves up towards the higher latitudes to less favorable than what it's going to be facing right now, which is closer to nil or very negligible for the next 2 days or so.
Yep, we're just getting it back up again here, hopefully with some new imagery. Certainly no visible signs that wind shears are I've got to say, you're looking at that spiraling eye wall there, and it's got the classic appearance of a rapidly intensifying typhoon that usually gets to the upper echelons of Category 4 or 5, I've got to say.
Nathan, what would you forecast peak-wise for Hyshen right now?
Right now, I would say 155.
For me,
So
I think I would
agreement.
say possibly 160 and pressure probably a little above 920 or possibly 915.
Yeah, I mean, if it peaks up, if it goes even higher than just regular super typhoon, which is 150 miles an hour, and goes up to 155, 160, it'll probably do it slightly sooner than the indications in the forecast, just because it'll really happen from rapid intensification rather than, stair-stepping up, which means that the wind speeds won't be at peak at that point, really, when it starts to get closer to the Ryukyu Islands and portions of Kyushu in Japan. In about 3 to 3.5 days or so, but you could still have an extremely powerful storm nonetheless, delivering tropical storm force winds to a very wide swath of land too.
More questions. Will we ever do another remaster in the same style as the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season that came out in May? Well, Strat is begging me to remake 2017.
It'd be nice to have that back in a new style.
Strat is begging me.
Already?
Yeah. I would actually like to see a remaster of the 2017 Atlantic season.
I don't.
Why?
Here's another comment. Let's just move swiftly on. Who's seen one model that forecasts sustained winds of 170 knots for Hyshen at peak. No chance, right? I wouldn't say absolutely no chance, but it would be a minuscule chance, negligible.
I'm going to say 170 knots is about 195 miles an hour, especially because its peak is going to be further north than where you see a lot of Category 5 typhoons, if it even reaches Category 5 in the first place. I think they're expecting the peak, north of 20 degrees latitude. It'd be extremely difficult to have such a thing occur at that place.
Yeah, looking back at the West Pacific wide shot now, you can see Haishen once more there. Just checking to see whether this is up to date. Yeah. Do we think that there could be activity, I assume you mean in the Atlantic in this question, in November or December this year?
Probably in November, not in December. Too early to say.
Too early to say.
It'd probably be harder pressed in December. I know, of course, that was 2005, just going off the rockers, but you know, climatology would say no, typically, and even so, I think one of the main factors was that it is expected that we won't really have that conducive activity in December compared to, other analogs where there was more December activity.
ATCF has downgraded Omar to remnant low.
Oh, well, there goes another one. Omar off the grid by the looks of things. National Hurricane Center will confirm at 3 a.m. UTC. That's 2.5 hours from now. We won't be there for that, but that's some welcome news that a storm has died.
Can you pull up imagery for Omar?
That might be a disservice considering how terrible it looks.
No, I can't, but someone else can.
I imagine I can.
I would, but I'm on a laptop right now outside in the commons.
You can see the edge of Omar at the very top of the screen there, the very edge of it.
It looks terrible.
It doesn't look great. Blasty the Penguin says, 60% chance of La Nina this fall. We might see more activity into November. It
is possible, you could see lower shears as we start to head into the later season. So, I mean, like Ethan said, November activity, a bit above average certainly can't be ruled out right now.
Let's see if we've got some more questions then, because we are very user-orientated tonight. Will we bring back the hurricane management exercises? We wanted to do one in August-ish, but it's turned out that we've gone a little bit ahead of ourselves, and the operation to get everyone doing it simultaneously like last time is pretty monumental for simulating an August of activity, which is quite a bit more than the July activity. So it's on hold right now, and we've got a busy season to take care of. Will we remaster the 2020 hurricane season? It's not even been made yet.
It's not been made yet, but maybe it comes out as something a bit different than usual if we really try.
Unless they mean it in that style that we did for 2005.
I think they mean in that style. I don't know what your plans are with it, but that'd be pretty nice to see, at least in my opinion.
Not got any set plans yet. Do we think there'll be a Category 5 in the Atlantic this year? I think there will at some point. Until we get to the beginning of October, I would say that... No, the middle of October. I would say that's more likely than not.
Yeah. Someone gave a good one, actually. They're saying, why are there always typhoons and storms hitting the Philippines in November and December, particularly? I don't know if other people here want to talk about it as well, yourself included, Nathan. But
usually they fall much deeper in that time of the year, and they get dragged along the ITCZ as well, the Intertropical Convergence Zone. What you'll notice as well is that any storms that do move towards the north, they just don't survive. They just die off, or they get swallowed up by fronts or trots. So that's why you don't get storm landfalls further north. It's not that the Philippines is getting a lot, it's that no one else really is getting them. So it's the Philippines that usually have the limelight in the late part of the year.
And, because we can see really activity in the Western Pacific all year, that's usually why the earlier months of the year it's a very similar thing as well.
Yeah, not so much as the later months, though, because you've got the temperature lag on the sea surface temperatures.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because, that really late year, November, December, you can still have the sea surface temperatures up there to the point where, areas around the southern Philippines could still have 28 to 30 degrees Celsius waters in terms of at least that general latitude. Have a wave from the intertropical convergence zone emerge, gets really strong.
Loads more questions coming in. Although I'm not sure how many of them are particularly useful, I have to say. Mainly questions about animating, but that's not really what we're here for just now. But rest assured, we're doing plenty more at the end of this hurricane season. So let's get back to the topic at hand. With 20 more minutes here on this live tropical weather bulletin. You're looking right now, the center of your picture is Typhoon Haishen. That is now probably the strongest storm out there at the moment in the world, in the Western Pacific. What's the official intensity on that just now?
ATCF has not updated yet. I've been constantly refreshing the ATCF file. It's been loading quite slowly a little bit. But
They have it at 90 miles an hour?
The latest. Oh, go for it.
Yeah, the 18Z estimate had it at 85. It hasn't updated yet.
Oh, right. Latest I'm getting here is 90 miles an hour, and Maysak down to 80, so it is the strongest out of all the storms now. Maysak moving off shot. You missed it go off shot there, but just for those who are interested in seeing Maysak stream off to oblivion in the north there, you can see it there. It's lost a lot of its rotation. It is turning post-tropical. It's almost, it's more than halfway to turning post-tropical, but it still probably has typhoon force winds, aided by its fast motion.
A question coming in right now, I think this is interesting to talk about because it's actually accurate, really. Asking if the two areas of interest in the Atlantic, those two eastern waves, one that's meandering and stalling for the next 5 days, and the other one emerging off the coast of Africa, they could interact with each other, kind of Fujiwara style, really.
I think there could be all kinds of interactions that happen there in the next week or so. You can see already 2 of those systems prevalent. One of them out over the waters, it's blowing up some convective cloud tops, and to the east you've got a typical African wave there, very broad, disorganized, blowing up convection here and there. And I think something's going to move up north of that, isn't it, according to the National Hurricane Center and models?
Yeah, maybe a third area coming in on top of that. To answer the question really quick, I mean, it's possible that the two current areas of interest interact in some way, but it wouldn't be particularly memorable, really. So, I mean, this is just a general one for tropical cyclones, Nathan. How do you determine if a storm is extratropical?
Yeah, it's not an exact thing. Let's just take a look back at the imagery again. Where has it gone? Here's the Maysak imagery once again. So, ground observations would help with this. Generally, at least one of the quadrants loses all winds. And usually it's the northeast that's most dominating. The wind field expands, the system turns cold core, the convection gets further displaced from the center. You can see cloud cover in association with this storm quite high, blowing up quite high, extending all the way to the other side of the Korean peninsula there. So it really is almost finishing its post-tropical transition. And to be honest with you, in those latest frames, might just about have done it. It's inevitable and imminent at any rate.
Yeah, I guess if people want an Atlantic example of that, you could honestly use Faye this year as a good one for that. You know, it really got its convection displaced way off to the north and west of the center, didn't have any winds in the southern quadrant, and turned cold core as it began to move over land.
Of course, the ultimate example is Sandy.
Absolutely, that's definitely true. Interesting question as well. If Nana manages to reform the Eastern Pacific, which is 20% in the next 5 days right now, would it get a new name or keep its current one, Nathan?
The rule is now that they keep the current name as long as it's the same center. There is a little bit of controversy over this because, I mean, I'm personally not sure that Amanda ever lost its circulation earlier this year, the system that ended up becoming Cristobal. It was a big mess, but I'm not so sure on that. I would think that the most likely scenario is that Nana would be officially dissipated and the Eastern Pacific would get its next storm name if it did become a storm again.
generally a question on that as well. I'm just kind of curious if that, if a storm were to cross over now and maintain its circulation, in terms of record keeping, would you still call it an Atlantic storm even though it's even in the Eastern Pacific at that point?
I would. I always go by the area of formation.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think in regards to like, the agencies giving coverage on it. Would they indicate it, would they swap it over to the Eastern Pacific section on their, coverage notes, or would they say it's still in the
Yeah,
Atlantic, like an Atlantic
yeah, they
base?
probably would transfer it. It would make sense because you already have examples in the southern hemisphere where you've got the Australian region bordering the southwest Indian Ocean, bordering the South Pacific, and they all get transferred to different places depending on the storm's longitude. Could a hurricane potentially hit New England this year, Strat? This one's for you, I guess.
Well, we've had two storms already. We had Faye, which fortunately was very negligible, and we had Isaias, at least where I lived back in southwestern Connecticut before I moved back to college, was one of the top five most damaging storms in my town's history. It also had our town's first ever confirmed tornado, so that one was very significant, even though it wasn't hurricane force sustained winds at that point. It's always possible to have one try to approach the New England area again this year, especially if we have one of the stronger waves come across in the Bermuda High tries to abate a little bit under it. But it's probably, considering the current prominence, not very likely this month to see something try to shoot up, not make landfall anywhere else in the eastern seaboard and then try to make landfall in New England. Maybe something later in the year in October. At that point, sea surface temperatures would be less favorable once you start to get up north.
Will another hurricane form in the Gulf of Mexico? I would say that there's a decent chance of that. The areas that we're really looking at in the next 2 weeks in particular are the Western Caribbean, where Nana is basically, and the Atlantic north of the Greater Antilles, so the area moving up to the Bahamas towards the US East Coast. Another area that models have been very keen on in the super long range period.
Yeah, I noticed also long range, so this isn't really any reasonable forecast period, but as a potential area to watch, heading into next week for formation. A couple of the models, like because the parallel GFS and the actual regular GFS do try to develop something in the Gulf of Mexico next week, but at least for now, that's still more of just, hey, watch this area to see if something interesting happens, more than, oh, there's an actual area of interest to watch for formation within the next few days.
Some more questions there. Can a cyclone move from southern hemisphere to northern hemisphere? Not in theory. I'll just leave it there. In practice, some invests and pre-cyclones have been reported to have crossed the equator briefly.
But because of how the Earth's rotation works, northern hemisphere goes counterclockwise for cyclones, southern hemisphere goes clockwise. They can't really survive that transition because they'd have to completely dissolve their circulation and reform it going the opposite direction.
Many more questions coming in now. Do storms that traverse basins get their names changed? The rule now is that no, that doesn't happen around the world. That's a WMO, World Meteorological Organization, mandate. The last double-barreled names would have been when? I can't figure out when that would have been now. More than a decade ago. How hot do the Philippine waters get? Well, I can show you some sea surface temperatures right now. Hopefully it's up to date. Let's see what we've got. So this is pretty much up to date. The Gulf of Mexico fairly warm, 30 degrees plus on either side. The bit in the middle is a little bit cooler because of Laura last week. The Caribbean waters all around Cuba, 30 degrees plus. Southern Florida, 30 degrees offshore. The Bahamas, around 30 degrees. Further east, a little bit lower. Off the US East Coast, though, 28 degrees Celsius waters extending all the way up to the Outer Banks. So that's something to watch out for. And down in the Caribbean, the Lesser Antilles, 28 degrees at least around there. The Western Pacific then, you can see off the Philippines there, 30 degrees plus. The area that Haishen is in right now is probably the warmest in the Philippine Sea, if not in the whole Western Pacific basin. Over 30 degrees, 31 at least, around where the storm is at the moment. It will drop off a bit when it nears the Japanese islands, and I think that's why the models aren't so keen on that pressure deepening quite as much as they previously said, especially with that track moving west.
Yes, and even with these warm waters, if there is no wind shear like around Haishen, like right now, and like this storm is intensifying very quickly. I mean, you can see that the eye is clearing out. The eye temperature is minus 70 degrees Celsius right now, and I kind of believe that this storm might become a Category 5, to say the least, if the forecast changes. But it depends.
It is getting that look about it, that's all I can tell you right now.
Although I will say, despite its current track, not to rule out yet a potential landfall in Kyushu, even though typically, a lot of models struggle with initialization of high pressure areas, and they're, how much they're going to impact a storm usually turns out a lot of the time, recently at least, that they'll go further west over time as they develop. But Japan is still in the kind of uncertainty, I'm pretty sure, from the JMA at this point in time, even though the actual track of center has shifted west. So I wouldn't count out a potential landfall there yet. And even if it doesn't, the size of the storm at that time likely means that Japan would still get at least some tropical storm force winds in association with it.
Could the remains of Omar possibly make another tropical system in the North Atlantic? Models were suggesting that actually a couple of days ago, but it now looks like the Omar will be its own, the only thing there moving up northeast. There's not going to be a feeder system. Is the general wind shear values for the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season a record? I have no idea, honestly. And what happened on this day? Ethan, any thoughts?
I know that Dorian was weakening off the
yes.
off the coast.
I almost forgot about that. Oh my god.
Irma was on its way.
Yeah. Felix also became a Category 5 on this day. Just trying to think of any others.
Yeah, I mean, next couple weeks you're gonna have a lot of on this days, a lot of things to talk about. So
I think Hermine was moving inland.
Ah, yes.
I heard on the news that the Bahamas are still struggling to rebuild after Dorian. I mean, it's been exactly a year since they've been hit by Dorian, and they're still struggling.
I mean, unfortunately, it just doesn't really surprise me. A lot of these areas, fortunately, weren't as densely populated as, Freeport, or not Freeport, I'm sorry, up in Nassau, for example. But, the damage they just saw was immense. That's one of the strongest landfalling storms in history in the entire basin. Not just for pressure, but wind speed as well.
Wow.
And it stalled too. We don't just talk about the landfall for a storm like Dorian, but that thing stalled, over Grand Bahama for over 24 hours as it was getting larger. So, I mean,
probably the reason
damage
why
was total.
It's because there was a high pressure system right in front of it, like to the left side of Florida. There was a high pressure system, and it was like trying to stop Dorian from hitting Florida. And I think that's what that high pressure system did and made Dorian stall.
We've got a barrage of questions here, some of them very relevant, some of them not so much. Do we think the wave off Africa will form? My question to you really is which one? They've all got a chance. This one, the one that's furthest out in the central Atlantic there, the one behind it, and the one behind that, all got chances. Sean Haynes wants to know my favourite ice cream flavour.
Oh my god!
Well, I gotta say, I like.
So off topic. Why do you even ask that kind of question on a
it is a very odd
board?
question, but
Come on.
strawberry and vanilla is nice. Do you think that Omar could become the first windstorm of the 2020-21 European windstorm season?
European, what is
I mean,
that?
probably not. I think Have we already
It's
had the
supposed.
first one?
I think you did.
I'm
I
not
think it
even
was.
following that very closely, you
I
can
think it
tell.
was what got absorbed Kyle.
Yeah.
Became one of the first windstorms of the season. I mean, I haven't seen the long range models for what this, trough of low pressure that's going to come off the east coast and kind of absorb Omar in a couple days or what's left of it will do. But it's possible that you see another, absorbed remnant storm become a windstorm for Europe, but it won't be the same system at all.
Yeah, there might be a few of those this autumn, as we call it here. How many Category 5s have not hit land? In the Atlantic, not many. In the Western Pacific, a few. Would you be interested in making a top 50 storms of the 2010s? Might be cool, but as anything documentary style, it's a lot of work. Why does the WMO exist? And what does
What
it
is
do?
that question?
The World Meteorological Organization, yes, they are the regulatory body of all weather operations. They're the people that validate temperatures. They're the people that set the standards for measuring all kinds of weather, including tropical cyclones. They are responsible for naming, and they all meet together to discuss those things. It's a worldwide operation. The one thing that they really do have on there, which is really nice when you find it, because it's a bit of a minefield on their website, they have a severe weather map covering every subdivision of every country in the world. I gotta say, that's pretty impressive.
I guess the way to really describe, fully why it exists is, weather something that in all forms really impacts places internationally at the same time. And when you have international impacts from things, you need an international organization to delegate it.
Is the amount of dry air in the Atlantic normal? I would say it is. Is New Orleans prepared for the next Katrina? Well, I think the closest thing to that was Laura, and it missed. So hopefully, fingers crossed on New Orleans. What is the current Atlantic hurricane season ace? Does anyone know that?
I forget the exact value, but I think it's around 70 something if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that
Hold
though.
on, let me get it. It is
You-
apparently...
It might be in the upper 60s still because it
Hold on.
was during Laura around 68 at some point. Just for context though, for people might be surprised,
Lost it.
with this many storms to have an ace not like well past 100. You got to keep in mind that out of all the storms so far, 15 named, only 4 have been hurricanes. 3 of those were Category 1s, and there's only been one major
Yeah,
hurricane
so
that was a major hurricane for less than 18 hours.
what did you say it was? What do you think it was?
I think it's in the upper 60s or low to mid 70s.
No, nowhere near. 44
Oh, Jesus Christ, that's way less than I even was thinking.
in the North
I mean-
Atlantic. That's the current ace value. 44, it's above average for the time of year. We should be at 36. So it is pretty close, actually.
I mean, that really goes to show how many storms was just not even reached hurricane strength. 11 of them. And
Yeah.
Marco was only a hurricane for 6 hours.
I know. Let's see, just try and squeeze a few more questions in here very quickly. How much wind shear is there currently in the main development region? I haven't looked recently. See if anyone of our team can answer that in a moment. Why does the Eastern Pacific use the X, Y, and Z names but not the Atlantic? That's something that happened in the early 80s, actually. When they got to the W name, they freaked out because they might have gone to... they didn't know what to do next, so they put in X, Y, and Z. And when it happened in the Atlantic, for some reason, they didn't do the same. So, I don't
I'm
know.
assuming it's because the average number of named storms in the Atlantic is typically at least a few less than the Eastern Pacific, so they haven't really ever felt the need to throw in extra alphabet letters.
They didn't in the Eastern Pacific until 1982 or 85, whenever it was.
True, but now they got more satellites and ships going around so they can detect more storms in the Eastern Pacific that they might have missed otherwise.
Well, that's probably about it then. Unless there's recon info.
I think there is one right now, actually, doing a pass over Nana right now. It just did a center pass, actually.
Yes?
Maximum flight level winds above 55 knots but below 60 knots. Minimal flight level pressure. There was 997.5 with 0 knot or below 10 knot flight level winds. So that's the lowest flight level pressure, really. And let me check the SF Mars real quick.
So it's still staying around the same.
SF Mars, though, a few of them at that point, 3 at least above 55 knots. A cluster around 55 and 1 non-suspect above 60 knots. So they may try to bump this to 65 miles an hour, actually, if they hold that.
Okay.
But it had a similar reading earlier, though, and they still kept it at 60 miles an hour. So it's really either or. Regardless, 5 miles an hour is negligible.
Well, this was the live tropical weather bulletin. We'll probably be back with another one tomorrow. We'll certainly do something. We'll be around. Stay tuned on our YouTube channel. Subscribe if you haven't already. And you can follow us on our social platforms on Facebook and Twitter. That's where all the information's being pumped out usually. And of course, our 24/7 live stream is currently live, you'll be pleased to know. And it's showing you all storms in sequence. It changes over every 10 minutes or so to the next storm. So that's a cool little window into everything that's going on. That's all from us for now. And we'll be back again probably before you know it. Good night.